Well, across the U.S., we've seen a dramatic rise in homeschooling in recent years. This growth kicked off during the COVID pandemic and has continued even after public schools finally reopened, making homeschooling America's fastest growing form of education. So what factors have contributed to the sustained growth of homeschooling, even post-pandemic? And what lies ahead from a policy perspective for homeschooling? I think there's some minefields ahead. I think that's why Washington Post and others are focusing on it. Joining me now to discuss this is Meg Kilgannon, Senior Fellow for Education Studies here at the Family Research Council. She served in the Department of Education during the Trump administration. Meg, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thanks for having me, Tony. It's great to be here.
So it's fair to conclude that homeschooling during the pandemic was more than a fad. Parents said, hey, this might be a good option for us.
This article in the Post is humorous in a lot of ways in how they sort of miss what happened, as all the while they're studying exactly what happened. I mean, schools were closed down, and then they tried to do, some districts tried to do virtual schooling, online schooling, and moms and dads who were navigating that quickly figured out that it would just be a lot easier to do it themselves. And that's a big contributor to this rise in homeschooling. You know, you can control the quality of the education, you can control the content of the education, and you get to spend time with your favorite people, your kids.
Right.
So there's not a lot of downside.
It kind of pulled back the curtain because there's this mystique that's been held around education, that you've got to sit in a desk a certain way and you got to sit there for so many hours to get this amount of education. And all of a sudden we realized that, you know what, you can actually get all that they were giving you in a fraction of the time it's been taking for them to teach our kids. And so the kids get more free time, as you pointed out, parents get more time with their kids, and the kids turn out better. I mean, in many ways, they have less peer pressure. They're able to zero in on the educational strategies that work best for their individual children.
And it's a safe environment. It's generally free from bullying, aside from whatever, inter-sibling squabbles that may occur, right? And you're going to get those whether you homeschool or not, right?
Yeah,
But
they happen.
They do, and that's a part of life. But the study, this isn't the first article that the Post has done in this vein. They did a profile of Mike Ferris that they found him to be rather terrifying. Of course, I admire him a great deal. He was a homeschooling rights pioneer and past president of the ADF. They've done a profile of a sex education teacher in Holland, Michigan, that was very positive about her and how traumatic it's been for her, that people don't want her to be educating people about sex in Holland, Michigan. And now they've done this big homeschooling study. So their audience is a national audience, but it is my hometown paper, unfortunately. All of my neighbors, we read the Washington Post. That's how you find out what's going on where we live. And so they are presenting a picture to a particular audience about homeschooling that is not a positive one, unfortunately. And why they're doing that is, the left doesn't have children; they have our children.
Right.
So they can't indoctrinate our kids if we're keeping them home.
As a former policymaker and a homeschool dad, we've homeschooled our 5 children. Homeschoolers understand you've got to live with vigilance, knowing that there's a policy around the corner coming in to try to limit your ability to teach your children or influence in some way. So my take is this is teeing up policymakers to come after this growing segment of society, because most people don't realize this unless they homeschool. When you pull your child out of a public school, that public school loses money in most cases that follow the child. That doesn't necessarily go to the child when they're homeschooling. So the educational establishment, for the most part, despises homeschooling.
Right, and they want to regulate it more and more. I think you'll see more bills introduced in state legislatures to require testing, or to require certain assessments, to require additional regulations, especially in the states where there aren't any regulations now. And that's exactly because of what you just said. You know, in the end, it's generally about the money, but it's also about the access to children's minds. And we're having fewer and fewer children. And so the fight over those children's minds and bodies and souls is going to become more and more intense over time. And
Yeah.
this is exactly one of those fronts.
Well, and I applaud those parents and those moms like my wife who took basically the bulk, the lion's share of the task of educating our children. And I will tell you, no regrets. No regrets of educating your own children, instilling, sharing your values with them, and preparing them to not just compete in the workforce, but to be able to survive and thrive in a culture that's growing increasingly hostile to faith and values. Meg Kilgannon, always great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.